Welcome from the Trinity Episcopal Cathedral Labyrinth Guild in Portland, Oregon, where, as you may have heard Patricia say, it was 105 degrees here. I hope it's cooler where you are. So we're all trying to deal with the heat here. We're really glad that you're here joining us on this lovely summer evening to learn from our speaker tonight, Lars Howlett, about sacred time and sacred space. And for those of the...
It's my pleasure to introduce Lars. He has so many credentials. He's done so much work with labyrinths. And so he studied to become a master labyrinth builder with Robert Ferre for 3 years. And then in 2015, opened his own business called Discover Labyrinths, which is a wonderful website, and continues to build labyrinths. Beautiful ones. He's also a Veritas trained advanced facilitator, and he's actually a Veritas faculty member and part-time staff member as well. He's served with the Labyrinth Society on their board and was actually the organizer. I didn't know this until I read the website that he organized World Labyrinth Day for 4 years. No small undertaking. So lots of credentials, but the reason we really ask him is that he's actually a wonderful speaker, and he brings so much knowledge about labyrinths and how the design affects you, and how to use them in a creative way. So I'm just going to pass now to Lars and let him get started.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia, and members of the Trinity Episcopal Labyrinth Guild. It's really my honor and privilege to be here, and thanks for all the the audience here, everyone who's attending tonight. It's nice to see your faces and speak about the thing that I love the most. So I have a lot of labyrinth credentials, and that's just kind of because I have a hard time saying no to the labyrinth. So if anybody asks me to do this, if it's labyrinth related, I always say yes. So done a lot of labyrinth things. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Let's see. All right, you see that okay? Yeah, okay, good. So I'm here to, just talk about something that we all love and has affected all of our lives. And, this movie by David Bowie is just really, I could talk about it for hours. Oh, no, wait a minute. Is this the labyrinth we're here to talk about? Or I think it's this one. It's kind of this one, but, if you Google the word labyrinth, you get a lot of David Bowie. And that's common association for many people, but if you dig a little deeper, then you think about the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, and how the labyrinth was created by Daedalus to imprison the Minotaur, and Theseus needed the thread of Ariadne to wind his way to the center. But when you hear about this legend, usually we think about the labyrinth as being, a walled kind of fortress. And if you go to the Webster Dictionary, you actually look at the definition for labyrinth. It says that it's a place constructed of intricate passageways and blind alleys, something extremely complex or tortuous in structure, arrangement, or character. So that's not really my line of work. I'm not here to create something that's tortuous. And, a common question I get when I'm creating a labyrinth, that's like new to a community is, how high is the hedge going to be? Where are you going to make the walls? And a lot of people still confuse mazes and labyrinths. And, we're all out there kind of educating people about the difference now in our modern world, in contemporary times, between the maze and the labyrinth. And, the maze meant to disorient you, to, trick and puzzle you with choices along the pathway and dead ends, and trying to find a solution, but to some it's an amusement, but to other it's just a frustration. And this is me at the Dole pineapple plantation hedge maze in Hawaii. So I'm, as a labyrinth maker, I've really been curious, what is a labyrinth? What is it? What is it? Really, what is a labyrinth? And visually, I feel like this is what a maze is to me visually. And this is what a labyrinth is to me visually. And, I could talk about labyrinths all day, but really I tell people that, to really understand what a labyrinth is, you need to go experience it for yourself. You need to go and walk it, because, the labyrinth is really the experience. And, whenever I speak about it, I try to have a labyrinth available, temporary labyrinth, canvas labyrinth, for people to walk so they can experience it if they haven't done it before. So labyrinth to me is this. It's kind of, often a calming, centering, some ways simple, expansive, and the maze has walls because it's meant to disorient you, but the labyrinth is usually flat. It's usually two-dimensional, where you walk to the entrance, you can see the entire pattern, you can see the center. You could even walk straight from the entrance to the center if you wanted to, but that's not really the invitation of the design. And so the most common question I get after kind of what is a labyrinth is, how did you get started in labyrinths? And before I did all this, my bio of labyrinth life, I had another life as a photographer, and I worked for 15 years as a photojournalist part-time, and then I also taught photography part-time at a high school, and then at a college, a university. And so when I was teaching at a high school, this is me with my photography students, there was a labyrinth built in the courtyard. And it's pretty incredible. This is the first labyrinth I ever saw, was one that was under construction, one that was actually being built and slowly being puzzle pieced together by Marty Kermeen, who's a master labyrinth builder and creates these beautiful hand-cut paver labyrinths. And so he was out there every day working on the labyrinth, and I kind of became aware of it, that it was coming in, and eventually it was completed. And I kind of walked out there to see what it was, and inscribed on the circle was kind of an invitation to walk it. And so I stepped in and had my first labyrinth walk on this Chart labyrinth, 11th circuit medieval pattern. And I found it, the twists and turns began to make me reflect upon my life and slow me down, and I found it to be a great way to decompress in between classes. And when there was a grading period and things were very stressful, I found it a nice way to center myself. And I enjoyed the experience so much, I started taking my students out to the labyrinth. And what we would do is, on the very first day of the semester, we would go out and walk the labyrinth as a class. When all the other teachers were having their syllabus and their assignments, these are the rules, I said, well, let's walk out to the labyrinth. We're just gonna walk in silence and have a nonverbal kind of ritual to begin our semester together. And we reflected on our intention for that semester. And then on the very last day of the semester, we would return to the labyrinth and use it as a ritual to reflect on the things that we had learned, and maybe if there were still ideas or other places we wanted to go with our photography in the future after that. And the students really responded to the labyrinth as well. I didn't even know what labyrinth facilitating was, but I was kind of just doing it by just by I don't know, intuition. So, you know, it's great to also watch people walk the labyrinth, and it was fun to see the students out there, and some responded to it and others didn't. But I told the students that, you know, at times in your life, the labyrinth may, you know, speak to you more than others. And, you know, the labyrinth is here for you at the school, you know, whenever the course of the semester you feel like, you know, you have something that's overwhelming either at home or at school, you could use the labyrinth to, you know, pray or decompress, or you could even use it for focus, you know, before a test or, you know, studying for the exam. And then at that time in my life, I went through like a serious end of a relationship. It was a long-term 7-year relationship that my life just kind of fell to pieces, and everything kind of was thrown up in the air. And I moved from San Francisco down to Half Moon Bay to live by myself. And I realized that I needed a labyrinth for my own healing and transition in that time period to kind of, you know, walk as a daily ritual. And so I went to this kind of empty lot, and I took these stones and I gathered them from the beach, and I threw them up on the kind of bluff there. And just using the seed pattern, which we'll look at later in the presentation, I assembled with some friends the 7-circuit classical labyrinth. And at this point, I got confused and I kind of made a mistake in my seed pattern, and it wasn't working out. So I was like, but I set a camera up, and this is kind of a time lapse. Actually, like 250 images were taken, but this is kind of the excerpts of this time lapse. But when the labyrinth was completed, it was incredible just to see how many people were drawn to it. You know, people came to help build it. People came to walk it. People came to just admire it, ask questions. They started engaging with each other, with me, with the space. And I couldn't quite believe, you know, how fast it transformed the environment, the setting. And for me, I found it to be like a container, like it created a sense of being held, even though I felt like my life, I felt like I was adrift. The labyrinth felt like a sacred space, you know, that I could claim for myself. And it really settled into the landscape. When you just put rocks on the bluff and the weeds start growing in between, it's amazing how quickly the labyrinth can kind of seem like it's been there forever. And I was working for the local newspaper, the weekly newspaper at the time. And I finally got up the nerve to put a picture in the newspaper and kind of show people where it was, because it was just kind of word of mouth. And the image got published on a Wednesday, and then the very next day, the labyrinth was destroyed, was removed. My sacred space was desecrated. And it was a private lot. And I had done it without permission, but I had actually met the owner while I was building it. And he didn't tell me he was the owner, but he drove by and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm making a labyrinth." And he said, "You know, I think the kids are going to mess with it. I think they're going to throw a brick, you know, throw the rocks back in the ocean." I said, "Well, it's okay. I see what happens." And he said, "Well, it looks like you know what you're doing. I guess you can leave it for now, but I don't think it's going to last." So I said, "Okay." And later I found out this was the owner of the land. And it did last for those 3 months until it was in the newspaper. And then he thought it was a liability. And he was worried that someone was going to trip and fall and sue him once it became kind of publicized like that. So, but it was a good lesson in non-attachment. You know, the labyrinth is a metaphor. And then I talked to my friend, and he pointed out a new place, a little outcropping on a trailway to Mavericks, which is the surf this big wave surfers kind of flock there in the winter. And I just drew with a stick in the mud. I drew the seed pattern and placed the stones and created this 7-circuit labyrinth. And there were those 2 benches already there, and it was just like the perfect spot. It was even a better spot than the one before. And that labyrinth was the place that I really did my healing process from that relationship. And I would go out there and, you know, use it as a way to kind of process, you know, all the loss that I had been through, and then try to understand my identity again and who I was. And you know, I would walk it in the sun, and I would walk it in the rain, and I would go it alone, or I would bring my friends and family out there, and it was a great thing to show to other people and introduce them to the labyrinth and walk with them. And what amazed me, though, is that I would often go out to the labyrinth and find other people already walking it. And even though I had built the labyrinth for myself, really, it was often in use, and often I had to like wait my turn to use the labyrinth. And it was like this couple here with their little dog in the center of the labyrinth. It almost seems like they were, you know, they're going for a walk on the beach, and somehow they just got pulled into the labyrinth. And I don't even know they know what it is, but they're in the middle, and the dog is like, "Hey, are we gonna throw the ball or what?" or what? And after about 1.5 years, I felt like my healing process had been complete, and you know, that period of transition was over. And I took all the stones one morning. It was actually the spring equinox, and I threw them all back into the ocean. And the next day, a friend of mine came to me and said, "Lars, someone destroyed your labyrinth." And I said, "Destroyed it? Oh, you mean the stones being gone?" And they said, "Yeah, someone took all the stones and threw them in the ocean." I said, "I did that." And they said, "You destroyed your own labyrinth?" And I said, "No, I just transformed it. I took the stones, but I kind of lifted the weight off of it, and I put them in the ocean, but the labyrinth is still there." And they said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, all the plants and weeds and flowers that had grown up between the stones, you know, you can still walk the labyrinth. It's not really the material. It's not the stone." They said, "Oh, wow." So, you know, then you could walk it just among the life instead of the weight. But we have a wet season and a dry season here in California, and so in about 3 months later, it you know, the weeds kind of died back, and it became harder and harder to follow the pattern. So I did rebuild it that fall, and I rebuilt the 7-circuit classical labyrinth. But the next day I went out there, and somebody had changed the design into a wave instead of the archetypal labyrinth. And I said, "Oh, someone's messing with the labyrinth. I need to go out there and fix this." You know, but then I thought, you know, maybe I should give it a walk. Maybe I should see how it feels, because it looked like they knew what they were doing. The same thing that that guy had told me. So I walked it, and it actually works as a labyrinth. You end up in the curl of the wave in the kind of the center. And I thought, well, this is kind of cool. I kind of like it. So I'll just leave it. But the next morning after that, somebody else had changed it back into the classical labyrinth design. And I thought, well, there's a lot of people really invested in this labyrinth. Like, someone's making a new labyrinth, someone's making the old labyrinth. And then I thought, well, I like this wave. So then I changed it back into the wave design, and it stayed like that for about 4 more years. And the labyrinth had a life of about 7 years until I actually got engaged and moved away from Half Moon Bay. And then it really just kind of disappeared. But the labyrinth to me was a mirror. It really, you know, reflected back to me kind of who I was, and really helped kind of reestablish my identity, not being in a partnership, but being myself, and finding out, like, why did that not work, and who am I, and where am I going, and what is my next step. And you know, it was a great, I love taking pictures of it too. I loved looking at it. I loved photographing it. I loved walking it. I loved drawing it. I kind of loved everything about it, building it. And that kind of like sparked all my love for labyrinths. I guess I fell in love with the labyrinth. So it said, Jeff Sayward has this quote, which I really like, which Jeff says, throughout the long history of labyrinths, whenever and wherever society is going through rapid change and development, the labyrinth has blossomed. Now humanity is seeking the sure path of the labyrinth in an uncertain and confusing world. And that's my life, was uncertain and confusing. And I think a lot of people come to the labyrinth during times of transition or upheaval or loss. You know, at the Veritas workshops that I attend, you know, it's a lot of people going through major transitions in life. And now with the pandemic, it feels like we're all going through a major transition, a major time of uncertainty. And you know, I think that's a real big reason why we have so much interest in labyrinths right now, that, you know, everybody's going through kind of a crisis, especially with global warming as well. The other thing, along with like the labyrinth being a great tool for grief and establishing your identity, is that it creates a sense of the sacred. And it's come to the point, I feel like, where you have to ask this question, is nothing sacred? You know, where it's like a lot of us, it's, I mean, I don't know who we are in the audience, but personally, you know, it's so easy to lose a sense of the sacred. And, you know, it's because we're working from home, or we have cell phones and we're connected all the time. You know, the television, you know, all these things competing for our attention, being available, you know, 24 hours a day, you know, the lines blurring in so many ways. And what's interesting, you can, you know, Google the word sacred to get the definition, but you also get a chart of the word use in literature, because Google has been scanning millions and millions of books. And so you can see the use of the word sacred with lowercase s, and how it's been on a steady decline. And I think I need to, can I zoom this up there? Is that better? And you can see it kind of went down all the way to like 1980, like mid 80s, 85, and then it slowly starts to kind of rise back up again. And I feel like, you know, there is a kind of resurgence, and like, wait a second, like, do we really want to, you know, are we, maybe we've lost too much a sense of what sacred is. And it's interesting that like Lauren Archer's book, Walking a Sacred Path, you know, I think the title itself is so compelling, you know, the sacred path. And labyrinths create sacred space in a number of ways. They have a defined perimeter. Can you see the whole list like this? This is good? Okay, I noticed things are kind of small, so I'm zooming them in now. Labyrinths create a sacred space because they have a defined perimeter that make a separate precinct, right? They have a container. There's a gateway to invite you into the special domain. There's a pathway that directs you and focuses you on a journey. They're created with intention, consecrated through ceremony or blessing. They're intended for spiritual, religious, or personal reflection. They are an ancient archetype that has symbolic meaning and historic tradition. They're meant to be respected, free from distraction or inappropriate activity, i.e. it's, you know, you generally don't want to just walk randomly across the labyrinth. If you can, you know, walk around it, or, you know, park your car on it. Sometimes you have to, if a certain situation, like I've heard of a church that didn't have the space, so they had to have their labyrinth in a parking lot. But ideally, your labyrinth would be its own dedicated space. And then the use of sacred geometry in design, and sometimes by proportion. And sacred geometry is kind of where I'm at right now in my study of labyrinths. I've always kind of been a little intimidated by it, and I didn't really understand it very well. And this is my deep dive into sacred geometry, the first time really that I've gone creating this presentation for you all tonight. So it's very exciting. And in some ways, sacred geometry is very simple, right? It's the geometry of life. It's the geometry that is everywhere, you know, in the natural world. It's the geometry that creates balance and efficiency and also diversity in form. And you can use a compass, you know, and draw circles with your compass. And if I was doing this in person, I would have you all with compasses. You know, when I do Labyrinth Summer School, on the very first day, we draw this seed of life pattern with our compass. And if you have one, it's a good activity. I'd recommend doing this because, you know, creating labyrinths, creating geometric patterns can be a meditation and practice of mindfulness all its own. And it can be balancing too, just like a labyrinth walk. So this is a quote from Jean-Michel, and he says, "As soon as you enter upon the world of sacred, symbolic, or philosophical geometry, from your first thoughtful construction of a circle with a circumference divided by its natural sixes, your mind is open to new influences that stimulate and refine it. You begin to see, as never before, the wonderful patterned beauty of creation. You see true artistry, far and above any human contrivance. This indeed is the very source of art. By contact with it, your aesthetic senses are heightened and set upon the firm basis of truth. Beyond the obvious pleasure of contemplating the works of nature, the many, is the delight that comes through the philosophical study of geometry, of moving toward the presence of the one." So there's such diversity in life, but the more you look at it and study it, you start to see these things repeating themselves in very different ways. And these are shapes, but they're also patterns, ratios, and numbers, you know, 5 fingers, 5 appearing in all these different places. And the study of labyrinths as an archetype is also, you know, the study of geometry in some ways. But it's the sacred geometry. It's like the geometry of life, the patterns of life, right? And this is a image of a board that they use in Sweden to flatten the laundry. And it's in a museum, and carved into the board in Sweden is this 11th circuit classical labyrinth, but also this seed of life pattern. And this board is 200 years old, but I just thought it's so interesting to see, you know, on this old, I don't know what it is, household item of the Swedes, which I have a Swedish ancestry, is this geometry, the labyrinth and the seed of life. And I don't know if it sparked my interest or this connection, but last year I created a labyrinth with a seed of life rosette in the center for a public park. And I use the compass and ruler to create my patterns when I'm designing things for clients. And sometimes I'm replicating the exact chart pattern from the cathedral in France, and other times I'm creating new forms of the labyrinth. And this is it painted onto a what used to be a fountain and then was turned into a sandbox. This is now the third incarnation of this space. And it was aligned with the rose garden. So we kind of had the idea to put a rosette, not the chart rosette, because this is a neo-medieval design. It's not the chart design, but use the seed of life to kind of to reflect the rose garden. And so sacred geometry, arises in different ways. It comes in through the labyrinth, but it also comes in through mandalas. It comes in through the medicine wheel of Native Americans. It comes in through, these are the Nazca lines in Peru. You can see these kind of meandering or switchback double spirals. These are all these giant earth glyphs that are, huge in the desert, giant, but they believe they might have been walkable perhaps as labyrinths. You see, double spirals carved into the Maori canoes. And then in Hawaii, there are these concentric circles that are carved into the rocks. And they actually are called piko, which is like the chakra system in Hawaiian culture. And the piko wenea is the belly button, and that's your gut instinct, like your intuition, which I think, wow, it's like we're all speaking the same language, using these forms, and symbols. And, you think about the labyrinth as getting in with your gut instinct, with your intuition. So now we're going to go on a journey, right? And this is the journey of geometry. And it begins, just with a point, with a dot. And it's the here and now. It's the, all that is this one point. It's so small, but it's everything in some ways, because that point, from that one spot, everything can emerge. It's like a point of consciousness. And then 2 points, suddenly the point has something to relate itself to. And those 2 points become a duality, right? And then you can have the understanding of what something is by what something is not, and you're also beginning to create space between the points. And if you want to relate those points, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either draw a line between them, or you can have one point that orbits, the other point, and that creates the circle. And the circle is the symbol of unity or consciousness, or no, unity or wholeness. The point is the consciousness. The circle is the unity or the wholeness. But in some ways, the point is a circle, right? Expanded. But this circle is what creates the container, right? It creates the kind of sacred space. And Thich Nhat Hanh is a Zen Buddhist monk, and he does this meditation where he gets his tea, and he drinks his tea, and he gets into his meditative state. And then with his brush in the ink, he will set his brush in the bottom of the paper, and then he'll inhale 1/3 of the paper, and then exhale 2/3 of the paper, and create a circle. And it's a record of one mindful breath. And I think that's just, a beautiful, I've got one on my wall right here, actually, that I picked up. And now this is an invitation for you tonight. If you have a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, this is our first interactive portion of the evening. For you to consider, what are your sacred spaces? Where are the sacred spaces in your life? And these are like kind of physical spaces, or, they could be objects perhaps as well, sacred objects. And I want you to draw a circle. You can practice it mindfully if you like, where you inhale 1/3 and exhale 2/3. And in the circle, write the places that are sacred to you, your sacred spaces inside the circle. And then outside the circle, you can write, what competes, maybe distracts, threatens, or disrespects those things. So you are creating a container, and then what are the things that are on the outside, right? Because for something to be sacred, you also have to kind of have a boundary. You have to protect that sacred space. So I'll give you maybe 3 minutes here, and I'll play some music while you do this. Otherwise, you can take a stretch break if you like. Let's see. So we'll do this for maybe just a minute here. Okay. And if you'd like to put it in the chat, or some of it in the chat, you could share your sacred spaces in the chat if you'd like. So when a lot of people think about meditation and mindfulness practice, they think about sitting meditation, right? And maybe for a meditation, all you need is a circle, and you could sit in the circle, you could sit on your cushion, and you can have your meditation, your practice. But I'm really interested in embodied practice, embodied meditation. And so Thich Nhat Hanh, by practicing meditation with his calligraphy, or he practices meditation, mindful eating, or mindful walking. And so I was able to go to this retreat in Canada and practice walking meditation. And you can see me there up in the corner, kind of towering over everybody because I'm 6'3". So, but it was really interesting to go on a meditative journey, right? A walk. And, instead of having one point around the other in a circle, if you connect the 2 points together and form a line, then in some ways that is your journey, right? The circle is the space and the line is the journey. And if you take two lines, parallel lines, then it kind of creates a pathway, right? It defines the journey, a focused kind of, path. And, I think about the Camino de Santiago as like a walking meditation, right? A pathway. It goes from point A to point B, it does meander a little bit, but mostly a kind of a one-way linear journey. And so this is exercise. Well, let me read exercise number 1. Here we've got some sacred spaces that people are sharing. My garden and kitchen are 2 of my sacred places. Time by Mother Ocean, hiking, listening to birds, being in stillness. My front garden, painting on my walls, my icons, half of the top of my desk, my labyrinths. The Trinity Labyrinth, my grandmother's grave. Jokong at Maitra. Trees, Trinity, the Oregon coast, the chapel at SMU, where I went to university. My deck, my room, the altar, my son's ashes. Also Forest Park. One thing came up in both places, as sleep, as a distraction and a sacred place, right? And someone else wrote, distractions are television, computer, busyness. So now I want to think about a sacred journey or a sacred time. You know, if you think about a beginning, middle, and end, is there, have you been on a sacred journey in your life from point A to point B? For me, I went on a trip to Patagonia for the year 2000 when the Y2K was happening and the millennium was changing. And I went on a backpacking trip with a friend. And so that was kind of a sacred journey for me. And it was kind of like contained, like I wanted to be as far away from technology as possible when the Y2K hit. So, but it's also contained by time. And maybe your sacred time is your cup of coffee with a friend every Friday morning, you know, from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. or something. So we don't have the time for you really to draw a map, but I love the idea of drawing maps. And in some ways, by creating labyrinths, I think we are making maps. But you might want to draw a pathway or a map or a clock, you know, something that designates a journey of space or time from point A to point B. And reflect now on what has been a sacred time in your life, or a sacred pilgrimage, rite of passage, or daily ritual that you have. Again, if you'd like to share, you could put it in the chat. This is music by Laura and Sarah, if you'd like. It's called Musical Incense. Someone wrote, a genealogy trip to Europe turned out to be a sacred pilgrimage for me. My pilgrimage to Australia and New Zealand was a sacred journey for me. Daily ritual, the daily office, morning prayer, compline, taizé. As for sacred pilgrimage, the 2012 SMU spring break civil rights trip to Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. A trip to the UK in spring 2019 to return my mother's ashes, ended at Chartres, 9-week in total. Hiking to Slide Lake in East Oregon, morning coffee, wine with friends. Time spent at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and praying and leaving prayers in the wall. Holding hands with my dad in the last few months of his life as his mind became silenced with Alzheimer's. My most sacred time was the 4 months between my son's diagnosis of cancer in August 2020 and his death in 2021. It was a special and holy time. Dream work and Jungian therapy, pregnancy and birth. Sitting by the deathbed of each of my parents. There's a retreat center in North Cascades of Washington State that is a journey to get to because of its remoteness. And it was there I first saw a labyrinth. Sacred pilgrimage, all our travels around the world, ritual, afternoons with my husband in front of our garden, in our front garden, which is our sanctuary, walking in our neighborhood with my husband, and a pilgrimage to the Huichol Indians. Wow, I'm really touched. These are really powerful, the sacred times and places. And these are, I think, things, they're markers. Some of them have a lot to do with loss and transition rituals. Others go on journeys, can be difficult journeys or adventurous journeys. But out of ordinary time, a lot of these things, it's not everyday life, these sacred moments. Although some of the rituals are everyday rituals, so it's kind of interesting to create a sacred time that's consistent. Thank you for your sharing, your openness. So we can make 2 lines into a pathway. We can also take 2 circles, and what if we create these 2 circles in relationship to each other? We can create the vesica piscis, which, what is it? It's like the 2 circles touching the heart of each other. It's kind of a nice way I read about it. And it's kind of bridging 2 worlds, right? If you think about one circle as the human and the other circle as the divine, the vesica is a space that overlaps. It's also the mother form, the shape of generation. And from this vesica and this geometry, all other geometric patterns and platonic solids and things can be derived just using the straight edge and the compass. And we often see, maybe the figure of Christ inside the vesica. This is actually on the entrance to the Chartres Cathedral in France. So it's kind of the threshold getting into where you would walk the labyrinth. And if you take one circle inside of another, so concentric circles, you create a pathway that goes round and round. And you could do a meditation just by walking in a circle, This is an artwork by Richard Long, who's an artist who's done different labyrinth artworks and installations. And artists were actually using the labyrinth before the current revival, like in the 60s and 70s, in the early 80s. It was a lot of artists that were actually using the labyrinth as a symbol before it kind of came back into the consciousness in the Western world. And if you take the two concentric circles and make an entrance to the pathway and then an entrance to the center, then you kind of have a one circuit labyrinth, which this is Andreas Frey from the blog My Maze. He kind of came up with this kind of evolution, which I really like, which is, is this a one circuit labyrinth? Well, it kind of is, but it's also really a spiral, right? You walk in, you go around, and you end up in the center. And a spiral is another archetypal form. So it's, very easy to see in nature. It's probably one of the most easiest after the circle to see the spiral in nature. And the spiral is really something that represents growth and transformation in life. Now, if you created a two-circuit labyrinth, right, and you walked in, you went around, you did a 180-degree turn, and then you came around to the center, this would involve a switchback, right? Like going up a mountain, you use a switchback back and forth, back and forth. And so now you have a switchback in your labyrinth, but is this a two-circuit labyrinth? Could you have a two-circuit labyrinth? Well, it's missing the balance, right? Because you're doing a 180-degree turn to the left, but you're not doing a 180-degree turn to the right. So I don't know why Sharp is there. Oh, it's because of yoga, right? You need the balance. You need the left. You go to the left, you balance, you go to the right. So they do yoga on the labyrinth at Grace Cathedral, and this is an image on that. And if you stretch one way, you got to stretch the other. So in this labyrinth, you're doing one stretch in one direction, but you're not doing the stretch in the other direction. So in order to get that, you need alternation, right? So if you do a 180-degree turn to the right, you need to do a 180-degree turn to the left. And so now you have a three-circuit labyrinth, and there's a right-handed turn, a left-handed turn, 90 degrees, and then you have the two 180-degree turns. And so this is balancing now, balancing. But you're still missing one more thing, and that is the meander. And the meander is the kind of Greek key. We also see it in Roman columns, this ebb and flow. I mean, we even saw the Nazca lines in Peru. The double spiral is a meander if you walk through it. And this labyrinth has the meander, where you go into the center and then you go away from the center all the way to the outer circuit, and then to the middle. And so this has all the components, right? It has the circle, it has the line, which forms the entrance to the center and entrance to the labyrinth. It has the pathway, it has the spiral, it has the switchback, it has the alternation, and it has the meander. So it has all these archetypal patterns and the patterns of life. And so, the labyrinth is, I think Richard Feather Anderson calls it the Rosetta Stone of, what does he call it? The Rosetta Stone of, I'm getting all my terminology mixed up. I can't remember, it just escaped me. But basically the Rosetta Stone of earth symbols. And here's a quote from Lynn Bauman, who writes, "There are few straight lines in nature, especially in its biological aspects. There are, however, plenty of cycles, circles, and spirals. The life processes of every ecological system is a never-ending circle of giving in order that everything else may thrive and live. Technology prefers straight lines that move from point A to point B, or aligned architectural forms. In that environment, we often lose touch with the life-giving circles and the slow-moving spirals that sustain us." And I love this idea that, like, the labyrinth doesn't get you from point A to point B in a straight line. It actually takes you as long convoluted route as possible to get from point A to point B. I mean, really, that's like the labyrinth designer's like goal is to like make the journey as long as possible between 2 points, and interesting as possible. So the question is then, how did labyrinths appear all over the world? And a lot of it's because these shapes and symbols like meanders and spirals and circles and switchbacks, all these things, we see them in life. And so they kind of all converged into this form of the labyrinth. And I had the pleasure to go with Jeff Sayward and Kimberly Sayward to Gotland, the island in the Baltic Sea in Sweden. And we were there to study classical labyrinths. And there's this giant fresco of a labyrinth on the back of a medieval church. But Jeff is over there in the corner photographing something. And it's like, Jeff, what are you photographing? And what he's photographing is a seed pattern, right? It's a etched line, cross, dots, and corners that if you connect all the dots, creates the 11th circuit classical labyrinth. And so there's like this little evidence, and they think that maybe this could be 800 years old, like around the same time as the Chartres labyrinth. 1200, 1300, 1400. You can't really date these carvings very well. But many of you may be familiar with the seed pattern, but others, maybe it's new to you. So my goal here is to kind of provide something for everybody, the newbie and the experienced labyrinth person. So, to create the labyrinth, you just draw the plus or the cross, and you draw the 4 angles or corners, and then the 4 dots in a square, right? And then you go from the center of the plus up and over like a rainbow. You go, well, first you just go one little loop, and that actually creates the center that you're going to stand in. And then you're connecting the L's and dots and lines up and over, up and over, up and over. Now you've got the rainbow idea, right? One of the most common mistakes is people start just connecting the bottom dots and lines around the bottom because it's like the short way to go. But remember, the point of the labyrinth is go the long way around. So, up and over, up and over, and up and over until you create the full 7th circuit classical labyrinth from the seed pattern. So this is our next, here for the advanced or the experienced, is this revelation, which took me a long time to kind of realize, that the 7th circuit classical labyrinth is actually 2 3-circuit labyrinths put together. So there's a small 3-circuit labyrinth in the middle, and then there's a large 3-circuit labyrinth on the outside, and they are combined by a connecting path. So you have a 3-circuit, a 3-circuit, and then a connecting path to make a 7-circuit labyrinth. And when you're drawing it, if you just do the first 4 loops and stop, you actually have the 3-circuit classical labyrinth. So if you're new to this, maybe you just want to try the 7-circuit classical labyrinth from the seed. But if you're advanced, try just drawing half of the seed pattern and making a 3-circuit labyrinth. And then you can either erase the bottom half of your seed pattern, or you can use what I've showed here in the bottom is just kind of the 2 crosses, a vertical line, and then the 2 dots. And you can also make a 5-circuit classical labyrinth. If you're really advanced, you can use half of the 11-circuit seed pattern to make a 5-circuit labyrinth, because the 11-circuit labyrinth is really 2 5-circuit labyrinths put together. But if you're new to this, just ignore all that and just focus on your 7-circuit labyrinth and make the plus and the 4 angles and the 4 dots, and then connect them and make the oldest labyrinth that maybe goes back 4,000 to 6,000 years. So no one really knows how old they are, but they go back at least 3,200 years. There is one that we can date from Greece that's 3,200 years old, but we believe that there's older ones in Western Spain. And so this is your invitation to draw a classical labyrinth and I'll give you 3 minutes, but if you'd like to just take a break, you can just draw the seed pattern down and you can do this later or tomorrow, but you can stand up, stretch, and I'll give you 3 minutes here to draw your labyrinth. And if you're advanced, or if you're newbie and you're, what do you call it? Adventurous, you can go for the 3 circuit. Actually, the 3 circuit is very, you just draw the first 4 loops and you have a 3 circuit labyrinth. And my one bit of advice is that you want to start with your seed pattern on the bottom third of your page. So don't put your seed pattern right in the middle because you're doing all the loops on the top. So you really want to just go up about a third of your paper, draw your seed pattern, and then draw your loops. I should have said that earlier, and you don't want to make it too big, and you also don't want to make it too small. You kind of want to just try to find the right size. Maybe like 1/2 inch or 1 inch. It gets really hard if you draw really big or if you draw really small. If anyone would like to share your drawing, you could hold it up. Let's see, Laura, you got one? Let's see. Oh, maybe, how do I zoom in? Can I stop sharing my screen? Then I can, let's see. Oh, great. Oh, look, nice. 7 circuit, 3 circuit. Thanks, Laura, good work. Donna, let's see. All right, 11 circuit. Perfect, looks nice. Great. Anyone else holding up a labyrinth? Wow, sharing is not required. but labyrinths are due at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Should be on my desk. All right. Let me see. What am I doing? I gotta stop my sound. Okay. Resume my share. Anybody else have a labyrinth they'd like to share? Patricia? Let's see. Ta-da, yeah. Great. You know, and then you can use it. You have your own finger labyrinth now. So you can trace it with your finger, you can color it, you can draw the thread through with another colored pencil or something to okay. Super. You know, some people teach the 3-circuit labyrinth with just the plus and the 4 dots, but that's not really the archetypal classical labyrinth because it doesn't have the meander, right? If you just do 4 dots with a plus in the middle, it goes from the outside to the middle to the end. So if you do the half seed pattern and just do the upper half, then you get a true archetypal classical labyrinth with the meander in there, which I really like. So here's a quote from Dan Johnston. He writes, "A labyrinth is an archetypal symbol for life's journey. An archetypal symbol is one embedded into mankind over a long evolutionary history. It develops out of the almost infinite repetition of typical human experiences. Similar symbols arise in all cultures, and that is what makes them archetypal. An archetypal symbol is a container of energy. It can bring motivation and meaning to life. Archetypes are deep within us and await awakening. As an archetypal symbol, a labyrinth has power. It has an energy with which we can have a direct experience. Unlike many other archetypes, which remain abstract, we can physically get into and walk around in a labyrinth." I love that. Archetypes are deep within us and await awakening. It's like the labyrinth has always been there, right? So a lot of people ask me what my favorite labyrinth is, and this is it in Sweden on the island of Gotland. Outside of Visby is this 11-circuit classical labyrinth. And I just love how it's like worn itself into the land. You know, it's got this like organic, biomorphic, rounded shape. And it's just so humble too. There's no sign, there's no gate. It's just on the side of the street, but it looks across at the ocean. And it maybe has been there at least, it's been recorded since 1742. I think it was first noted. So it's at least like a 250-year-old labyrinth, but it's could be 400, 500 years. I don't know, but it's definitely had its life, great life, it seems. So now we're going to look at, this is like the brand new. Maybe some of you have seen my other parts of my presentation before, but this is exciting. This is the sacred geometry of the classical and chart labyrinth, at least as I understand it. So how does the classical and chart labyrinth reflect sacred geometry? And I learned a lot from Richard Feather Anderson about the classical labyrinth. So first it creates a container, right? A circle. It doesn't create an exact circle, but it forms a circle, an organic circle. And you have to remember that like the chart labyrinth is a precise labyrinth and the classical labyrinth is an organic labyrinth. And so the labyrinth, number one, has a circle and it creates the sacred space or the container. Then it has the line, which is the path, and that creates sacred time. And this is what I like. So sacred space, sacred time, right? You have the container and you have the journey. And so you have both time and space. It also has a spiral hidden in the classical labyrinth. And that maybe you can see that, you know, one side of the classical labyrinth comes down further than the other side. And that's kind of the little hint that there's a spiral there. But if you didn't have the turns, there would be a spiral that you would just walk through. You know, if you didn't have the entrance paths and the turns, it would just be a spiral. And the spiral represents expansion, right? So the labyrinth has sacred time, sacred space. It has the sense of expansion. Also spiraling inward, right? There's a cross in the seed pattern, right? And the cross represents manifestation. And that's how you create the classical labyrinth, is by drawing the cross first and then drawing the turns. So that's how the labyrinth comes into life, into existence, is by drawing the cross. And one beautiful thing about the classical labyrinth is that it's in the labyrinth, the point of manifestation. It also has switchbacks, and these are like a river, right? Going back and forth. You know, the river doesn't go from point A to point B in a straight line. The river goes back and forth like this. And so the labyrinth does that too. And what the river's doing is it's slowing itself down, right? If it went from point A to point B in a line, it would just rush out. But the switchbacks of the river slow it down, and they absorb the water into the water table a lot better because it has more surface area than. It also has alternation, right? You do the left turn, you do the right turn. You do the right turn, you do the left turn. And the classical labyrinth is perfectly balanced, left turn, right turn. And that harmonizes you, brings you into harmony. It has the meanders, right? The two meanders, and those mystify, right? The meander kind of is the mystery and magic of the labyrinth, because you get closer to the center, you get further away from the center. And it takes you out of your rational mind because you get lost, right? And some people say, like, you get lost in a maze, you can't get lost in a labyrinth. But people get lost in labyrinths all the time. And it's because of the meander, because they think they're going to the center, and then all of a sudden they're on the outside, and they're wondering, well, why am I on the outside? And that's the meander. And so it creates this mystery, and it gets you out of your rational mind and gets you into your intuitive mind, into your trusting. And it also brings out the metaphor. Like, that's a really strong metaphor, is the meander. But these are all metaphors. And so here are some classical labyrinths. This is one at a hospital in Vancouver Island. And this is the little point of manifestation, right? The center of the cross of this labyrinth. And I love how simple it is, yet beautiful, that they've taken these pavers and put them in all four directions, going out to the line ends. And Mircea Eliade writes, every microcosm, every inhabited region has a center, that is to say, a place that is sacred above all. Here's another version of it, the concentric circle version of the classical labyrinth, painted by Holly Carnegie Lecker in Vancouver Island also. And here's one outside of an emergency room in here in California, San Leandro, made of recycled glass. And here's a classical labyrinth I created for horses with wide pathways. And here's a classical labyrinth I made out of bottle caps. So if you've learned the seed pattern, you know, next thing to do would be to try it with small objects. You know, instead of drawing it, try building it, but build it small. And I made this as an altar in my home in Half Moon Bay. I've even created a three-dimensional, I have it here, a three-dimensional, oh yeah, Donna's got one too. She's got the Chart labyrinth. Right, so, you know, labyrinth doesn't have to be flat. It can be a sphere. This is a spherical classical. So, you know, there's endless opportunities for labyrinths. Okay, so now we're going to look at the Chart labyrinth. Dun, dun, dun. And now the sacred geometry of the Chart labyrinth, right? This is the precise labyrinth, right? From 1200 and the cathedral, the Gothic cathedral in France. And this I learned mostly from Robert Ferre. So the circle, boom, there it is, creates sacred space. The container, right? The lunations around the outside. the line creates sacred time. And this is the Ariadne thread of the Chart labyrinth, which you don't see very often. It's kind of fun just to see the Chart labyrinth just through its path. And it's a longer journey because it's an 11 circuit labyrinth, meaning if you stand in the center, the pathway surrounds it 11 times. It twists around it, circuits. Now there's a secret spiral in the Chart labyrinth, which is the placement of the turns. So the labyrinth turns, which are the double-headed axe kind of turns, they spiral out from the center in between the circuits. So there's one between circuit 1 and 2, there's another between circuit 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, 5 and 6, and they create a spiral of turns in the medieval labyrinth. And that has a sense of expansion. There's a cross, which is the placement of the turns on the axis, right? You have the entrance and the top, and then you have the left and the right. And so unlike the classical labyrinth where the cross is, you can see the cross in the entrance. Actually, in the medieval labyrinth, the cross is in some ways more hidden because you don't see the cross point, but you see the cross in the turns. And that's the manifestation there. So when you're standing in the center of the labyrinth, you're actually standing in the center of the cross of the Chart design. Here's a kind of little secret about the Chart labyrinth too, which is there is a switchback pathway that goes from the center all the way to the outside. It goes, when you're walking through the Chart labyrinth, you walk from the center all the way to the outside, circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit. So like if you numbered the circuits, 1 through 11, you're walking circuit 1, circuit 2, circuit 3, circuit 4, circuit 5. So it's actually very linear, but you would never know it because you're doing so many turns. But that's the absorption, right? You're halfway through the labyrinth and you're absorbing all this experience, or you're getting lost into the labyrinth. Here's another interesting thing, alternation. So the alternation in the Chart labyrinth is that every other circuit goes a different direction, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise. So if you're walking into the labyrinth and you want to go out, just step over to the next pathway and you'll be going the other direction. You'll be going out of the labyrinth. Which is kind of fun to think about. And this is why it's so easy to kind of get sucked to spit out of the labyrinth. Like I took my dad to Grace Cathedral, and every time he walked the labyrinth, he kept going back to the entrance and he couldn't get his way to the center. But that's because he just would take one step over and then he'd be walking backwards. He'd be going out the other direction. So it's kind of amazing to see this. I drew this drawing of the Chart labyrinth with all the arrows. And the arrows are just going all the way to the center. But if you look at it, every other circuit is clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, all the way to the center. And so that's harmonizing you, right? Clockwise, counterclockwise, turning and circling. And then the meanders, they're harder to see, but there's 2 meanders in the Chart labyrinth as well. These are the meanders that take you into the center and away from the center, into the center and away from the center. There's 2 of them, just like the 7 circuit classical, but they have more turns. And that creates the mystery, or some of it. I mean, there's a lot of mystery in the Chart labyrinth. But as kind of a bonus, the Chart labyrinth also has the vesica, but it's not in the labyrinth, it's in the container of the labyrinth. So the vesica in the Chart labyrinth is actually in the cathedral, in the design of the cathedral. And so you're actually standing in a vesica, but it's a larger vesica of the whole Chart cathedral, representing birth. And maybe Mary, right? The whole cathedral is dedicated to Mary, who's the mother. Now, the other thing you can do with a vesica that we didn't talk about, and this could be like a whole, day or week study, would be the meaning of numbers. So numbers don't only have value, like 3, like I have 3 cups, but they also have meaning, like 3 as in your divine nature, and the Trinity. And from the vesica, you can also form the first geometric shape, which is the equilateral triangle. You can also then create a cross in the vesica with a circle, smaller circle, and then you can create a square. And now you are beginning to construct, the building blocks of the universe. And if 3 represents, well, I think I have a summary of it on the next page, the Trinity or the divine nature, the square represents the earth or the body. And so Robert Ferre taught me this, that if you wanted to be both in your body and connected to the earth, but to also be spiritual and connected to the heavens, you would want to be both 3 and 4. And so you can combine those two symbolic numbers, either by multiplying them or adding them, to create 12 or 7, right? And those numbers show up everywhere in the Chart Labyrinth. So the Chart Labyrinth really is the ultimate connection space between the soul and the body, or the earth and the heavens. And so 3 times 4 is 12. It takes 12 circles to form the 11 pathways. 7 is how the rosette is created. There are 6 petals of the Chart rosette, 6, but they are around an invisible center circle, which is actually not invisible in the Chart Cathedral because there's a giant circular stone there in the center of the labyrinth. Well, a couple of stones that form a circle, but there's basically a circle with 6 circles around it. So you have 7 circles. So you have 7. So you have 12, 7, and then turns, you have 7 turns in each quadrant of the Chart Labyrinth. So you have the 4 turns around the entrance, and then here you have 3, half of these double turns, and that's 7. And so there's actually 28 180-degree turns. So there's 4 sets of 7 4 sets of 7 turns. So 28. So you've got 7, 7, 7, 7, 4 times over in the Labyrinth turns. And then in the lunations, you have 112, which is 4 times 28. So now you have the perhaps symbolic lunar calendar around the outside of the labyrinth. But you can just find 4s and 7s and combinations of these numbers throughout, but they're very inlaid into the design. And then 2 more little fun facts from Robert Ferre are the center is about 7 path widths wide, and it's surrounded by 11 and 11, which is 22. And so 22 surrounding 7 is also 22, 7, which is the medieval understanding of pi. So they have the proportion of pi in the circuitry of the labyrinth. And you also have the golden spiral. If you take the center to the outside of 1 half of the labyrinth, then you have the golden ratio between the center and the other 11 circuits plus the lunations. So it's just incredible to see how many ways the Chart Labyrinth reflects sacred geometry. And if you're really into it, I would suggest the course by Robert Ferre on Teachable. It's veritas.teachable.com. And there's a 1-hour lecture just about the mysteries of Chart Cathedral, which is really fun. So Sig Lonergan wrote, "Sacred geometry is based on ancient sacred knowledge that was articulated in architectural forms. It is a lost art that developed a balanced and serene climate for the human psyche and soul. Through proportions, placement, and position of stone, wood, and mortar, using a complementary system of numbers, angles, and design, the mind can find rest, comfort, and harmony." Here's the Grace Cathedral Labyrinth. Here's an outdoor Chartres Labyrinth. You can walk it as a group, you know, because it has a large center, it really lends itself to group walks. Canvas Labyrinth. This is a variation that I created for a client with a fruit of life in the center. Instead of the seed of life, it's the fruit of life, another geometric pattern. So you can create, you know, custom variations of the Chartres Labyrinth as well. This is a 7-circuit variation of it. So this is called Chartres Essence, which is a smaller version of the Chartres 11 circuit. It's in 7 circuits. And you can also do a 5-circuit. And also on that Teachable website for Veritas, I have how to draw the 5-circuit medieval. And again, I would invite you to, you know, draw these, you know, create object labyrinths with them. You know, just looking at the labyrinth can be meditative. You know, I often think we just talk about walking labyrinths, but, you know, just having it, I mean, probably many of you have a labyrinth necklace or a labyrinth on the wall. It can be very powerful just to have a labyrinth up, you know. You could take your drawing and put it up tonight on your refrigerator. See it every time you go. And then finger labyrinths are the new, well, not new, but really popular now with the pandemic, the finger labyrinths. And we've been doing Friday walks. So if, you know, you also have been doing a monthly walk with handheld labyrinths. And it's just incredible to see, you know, the use of labyrinths in this context and in this version. My joke is that we used to walk labyrinths in a group, and we used to do finger labyrinths by ourselves. Now we do finger labyrinths as a group, and we walk labyrinths by ourselves. It's kind of backwards. And then you can also write. You can journal into your labyrinth. You can write reflections or poetry. Or I led 2 workshops about the pandemic as a labyrinth, and how the labyrinth journey through the labyrinth was similar to the journey through the pandemic. And it's been a boom time for labyrinths. Like Veritas trained twice as many facilitators last year online than they did in 2019 in person. So they trained 90 people in person in 2019. They trained 180 people in 2020. And you know, workshops, I used to get like 12 people to my Labyrinth summer school, and now we're selling out the workshops with 36 people. So I've had more work building labyrinths than I have ever had in my life. And you know, this article was in Bloomberg about, you know, the pandemic era appeal of getting lost in labyrinths. Pretty exciting. And so today, actually, I Googled labyrinth to see if it was coming back into consciousness like I did. I've never done this before, but I Googled labyrinth to see, and actually you can see that labyrinths were in decline. And then in terms of finding it in books, you know, being scanned by Google, the word labyrinth is now, at the same time that sacred came back, kind of like just around the 1980s, starts to come up and up and up and up. So this is pretty awesome. But David Bowie might be, some of that labyrinth might be David Bowie, but although that would be capital, wouldn't it? Because it's a movie title. So maybe it is just labyrinths that we love. So finally, I was just going to share one little story. We're winding down here. I know we're it's gone on a little bit. We started a little late, but thanks for staying with me. This is the Land's End Labyrinth in San Francisco, and it's a really beloved labyrinth. And many people use it as a pilgrimage site. And you know, even though it's so beloved, it falls into disrepair, and the labyrinth gets lost. It loses its way, it falls apart. Either people accidentally kick the stones, or some people intentionally throw all the stones back into the ocean. And it's lost. And it's kind of like the sacred and the desecration, right? It's a site that is like sacred site, and then it's like a desecrated site. And it's kind of interesting when I was looking back at these photos, is like you see the archetype coming back into consciousness. Like people start bringing stones back and they make a circle, and then they get a little more stones and they make a spiral, and they don't really know how to make the full labyrinth. So I turned the spiral into a classical, and then people started walking it. It's like I shifted the spiral into the classical, and then people started showing up. And then they had a volunteer day where everybody came and they created the concentric circles and rebuilt the design. And Eduardo Aguilera is the artist who originally created this labyrinth like 20 years ago. But he doesn't go back very much. He just built it and he doesn't really use it. So Colleen Yergi is the labyrinth keeper. And she's like the labyrinth tender that keeps the labyrinth alive. And she's the one that organizes the volunteers and gets everybody to come back and to recreate it over again. She's the fixer, but she's keeping the sacred space alive. It was Eduardo who had the inspiration and vision to make it. Colleen is like keeping the flame alive, lit. And here they are setting it out and rebuilding the labyrinth. And just looking at this made me think of this question is like, I think the question for all of us is, how do we maintain a sense of the sacred in our lives? How do you keep a sacred space alive? How does this labyrinth maintain its energy and its presence for the individual and for the collective whole? And then I think as a society, it's the same thing. It's this question of how do we keep this sense of sacred alive in ourselves? And that's kind of like our human challenge now, I think. And this is what Lauren Arches just said at the Holy Fool. She wrote a book called The Holy Fool, and she did a pilgrimage. Donna was there, and she said the vision of Earthrise is to find the sacred in everything. Like we have to reclaim everything as sacred in order for it not to get desecrated and destroyed and lost. And the problem is nothing was really sacred, and so everything was getting lost. The sacred is not in heaven or far away. It is all around us, and small human rituals can connect us to its presence. And of course, the greatest challenge and gift is to see the sacred in each other. Alma Luz Villanueva. And I think the labyrinth does that. I think the labyrinth is the perfect ritual to connect us to the sacred and to the sense of presence. And by sharing the labyrinth with each other, walking it, studying it, drawing it, being online together, we are able to connect to that sense of the sacred in each other and in the design and in our lives, I hope. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed putting this presentation together, and it's been a journey. And I thank you for sharing this journey. And now the journey is yours. So if you want to learn more, I have a website, and you can email me as well. My email is findlars@gmail.com, and then we can have questions and answers if anyone is interested.
Thank you so much, Lars. It was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Great, thanks, Patricia.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I have one question. I have two questions. Well, first is a statement, actually, that the way that you showed from the seed pattern to draw the seventh circuit was a little bit different than I learned it, because you would sort of this way, and then you'd go that way, and then back this way. I had learned it that you kind of go around the same way each time.
Mm.
So I was going, oh my gosh, do they create the same pattern? And they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a learning for me. It was a different way of drawing it.
Yeah, you know how that happened for me
How
is
did
I
that
was
happen? Uh-huh.
doing it on the beach because I would draw the seed pattern on the beach with my foot,
Uh-huh.
and I'd walk all the way back around and then draw and then walk. And then I was like, why am I doing this? I can just walk this way, then turn around and walk that way, and then turn around and walk this way. And so doing it on the beach, kind of, that's how I came into that, doing it this way, that way, this way, that way. But yeah, it works the same.
It is. It's actually a little bit less. It's actually less confusing. So I
Yeah, if you
like
go
that a
this,
lot, and it's certainly on the beach a lot less walking. I have
a
to
lot less
agree.
walking on the beach. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And
Or in the snow, as Alice.
in the snow.
Yeah. All right. It is a lot to take in.
Yes.
And my caveat, Anne, is just to let it wash over you. And some of it will sink in, and other things will just kind of be planted subconsciously. And they may arise again, but the recording will be available, in time, and then you can pause and rewind because it's a lot. But it's just let it wash over you. That's what I did with Robert Foray. He used to go so fast, and I'd be like, oh my God, Robert. But I did find over the last 10 years that ever since I took that first workshop with him, things come up for me. I'm like, oh, there's the spiral that he talked about.
It's stinking hot here, so I'm a little
Oh.
Hard to focus in the heat. Yeah.
It is. But it's worth it.
You got to put we taught a workshop in Sydney, Australia in like 110-degree heat, and everybody had like cold washcloths on their back of their neck, and they're fanning, and yeah.
There's a question in chat about how to get the recording. The recording will be on the Cathedral website in 3 months. And if you're on our mailing list, I'll let you know when that's up.
The YouTube channel. Yeah. And I do have other courses on Teachable. So, if you're really like on fire now with labyrinths, you can go to Teachable, and I have like how to draw classical labyrinths. I have a course in classical. I have a course in chart labyrinths. This is the most I've ever done about sacred geometry. So
that was really interesting. I love the circle and the path and all of those aspects of it.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating once you see all the different and really have Robert and Richard Feather Anderson to thank for those. So
so could you teach us, where is the Teachables again? So
it's veritas.teachable.com. Yeah, Heidi put it in the chat.
Teachable.com. Okay.
Yeah.
And also in the chat, Heidi's putting you're going to be doing a workshop.
Yeah, I'm doing
Veritas.
Yeah, this is on walkable labyrinths. So if you want to do a weekend workshop on creating walkable labyrinths, it's going to be in October. I think the first weekend of October, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'll teach you how to create, using simple techniques and everyday objects, create your own temporary walkable labyrinth. And then you can create two, one classical, one medieval, in your backyard or in your neighborhood or in your driveway or even in your house. So it's a kind of a fun experience to create your own walkable labyrinth, and then you get to like share it with the other participants and get their feedback and inspired by them. And usually people think labyrinth building is like really tortuous, but I said that's not my goal. It's I'm not a tortuous labyrinth maker. I'm a meditative labyrinth maker. So I really try to make it as like, these are the easiest, straightforward, and you can always make tabletop labyrinths. You don't have to make a walkable labyrinth to do the workshop. You can make a tabletop labyrinth out of coins or whatever. So any questions or reflections?
I have a question. it went by so fast. How did you get to the square from the Vesica design?
That is a new thing for me too. You
Uh-huh.
draw the vesica,
Uh-huh.
and then you draw the cross,
Uh-huh.
and then you draw the smaller circle inside the vesica,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just connect the points of the cross on the smaller circle in the vesica.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you. I had
Yeah.
never seen that before.
Yeah, I mean, there's many different ways you can make a square using a compass and ruler, but that's the easiest one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd encourage you to get out a compass and, you know, some graph paper. It helps to have graph paper because it helps keep you. The hardest thing about the compass is that you have to be very precise. So also buy at least a medium level compass. Don't get the like elementary school one with plastic, because those are really hard to use because they move around too much. You need like a good compass.
Mm-hmm.
But they're fun, and you don't have to like, don't think about it. It's just like see it. It's like visual math, like, don't think about it. Just connect the dots. Yes, Connie?
You're muted, Connie.
That's great. Anne loved geometry in high school.
I hate to say that I've been looking for a, what did we just call them? Compass. And I was supposed to get a 10-inch compass to do my icon drawing. And I could not find a nice 10-inch compass anywhere. Do you have larger compasses or do you use smaller compasses?
I mean, mostly I use the handheld one, but I did find a big one. Do I have it here? Yeah. This is one I found on Amazon.
Okay, that's what I'm looking
For
for.
really, yeah. And you can just put a pencil there in the.
Okay, so I will not give up my search.
No, this one worked out pretty well, and it wasn't that expensive. And when I build labyrinths, I use 3 different size compasses. I use a giant compass with a pole, because you make the circles with a giant compass, and then you make the turns with a medium-sized compass. You can also get what's called a yardstick compass, which is, I don't think I have one around here, but you put a compass, a point, and a pencil lead on a yardstick, and you can slide them back and forth, and you twist them in. And they sell them in art stores. Like if you go to like a college art store, and you can get a yardstick compass. And then, the yardstick's too big, but you could break the yardstick in half, and you could have a 10-inch compass or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Thank you.
Yes. Cheryl?
We're preparing to build a labyrinth at our church in Southeast Portland. Do you have any recommendations for materials? I noticed most of the ones you had were stones or rocks, and we're looking to make something that'll be a little more permanent, hopefully.
Yeah, well, the options are endless, and that's what's kind of cool about labyrinths, is that it's like a niche market, but you can make them out of anything, and you can all do all different variations of designs and everything. So, but if you want something that's hard surface, the first level usually is decomposed granite with like inlaid bricks. That's like a hard surface, like semi-accessible labyrinth. But then the next level is often like, then you kind of have to go to concrete or pavers, and you can paint on concrete, but it only lasts 3 to 5 years. So you have to keep repainting it. But then I use this material called granitite, which is a crushed stone, and we tape out the labyrinth, and then we use the granitite, and that's a fade-proof stone overlay of concrete. And then you can do pavers, but that's the most expensive and highest level.
At my church, we made one out of pervious paper. We had it poured and then painted on it. And yeah, 3+ years needs
Yeah.
repainting, but that's okay too.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Permeable concrete. I think that's the future. And
We even got a grant to do it because it helps the watershed.
yeah, some places also, if you remove your lawn, they'll give you like $2,000 for not having a lawn anymore. Some different counties in California are doing that. So stamped concrete. I've only seen one stamped concrete labyrinth. It was beautiful, but it was cut, it was scored. The labyrinth was cut into it, which is also a really intensive process. And then you can also get like water jet cut stone labyrinths, but those are also, that's the highest end, even beyond pavers, is like a computer cut stone labyrinth. Polyurethane paint, and it's going on 5 years, only slightly faded. Well, that's good. Donna's got a painted labyrinth that's 5 years young.
So that's just where the paint is?
I guess. Donna, I don't know about you just painted the lines, or did you paint the pathways?
The whole is a slab of concrete that we put a template down and painted, and then we put polyurethane over the whole thing. But that might not be the exact name of what it was.
Like a sealant.
Sealant, yes. Better
Yeah.
state.
Yeah, that would mess up the perviousness of our previous pavement, but good thinking there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we seal the granitite labyrinths. Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I was just wondering if in your travels you've ever found a fairly old labyrinth that has gemstones or like turquoise inlaid, beautiful stones inlaid into the labyrinth.
I haven't. I know people that put gemstones into labyrinths, and I built them where people have buried them or interspersed them in the turns and things.
Oh, okay.
I've never like found a labyrinth
over 100 years old.
No, not that I did. When I went to Sweden, they have more ancient and historic labyrinths in Sweden than any country in the world. Walkable labyrinths, there's like over 400 labyrinths that are 100 years old or more.
Wow.
And like there was one labyrinth that had a stone in the center, and I was like, I looked underneath. I was like, is there gonna be anything under here? I didn't find anything. But I don't know. I don't know if they buried things in their labyrinths. Not that I've heard of, but Jeff Sayward, who's the preeminent labyrinth historian, would be a person to ask if you really wanted to. And he's pretty good about answering emails. You could send him a question. Laura?
And have Native Americans built labyrinths on the reservations that you know of?
Well, most Native American labyrinths are symbolic. They're used in jewelry or basketry or ceramic. But
not walkable.
Not walkable. Actually, I don't even really know. It's a good question if any Native American tribe has made a walkable labyrinth. All the examples I know are symbolic, not walkable. I know Man in the Maze labyrinths, but mostly I think those are not created by Native Americans. They're made for like museums or, private residences or other things.
Right. Interesting.
Laura?
I'm going to assume that most of this information is available elsewhere so that it can be researched and presented elsewhere besides just here.
Yeah, well, all of my knowledge comes from a variety of sources. So it's, Robert Foray, Richard Feather Anderson, Erwin Reisman, and the blog My Maze. Maybe someone, Heidi, could find that. My Maze blog is a great, from Germany, website about labyrinth design, and a lot of what I presented came from there. And I also create workbooks when I do workshops. So if you take a Veritas workshop, then you'll get a workbook with the information. On Teachable, not only do you get the recording, but you also get handouts. So I have PDFs about some of these things, but the whole sacred geometry this is something new that I compiled from lots of different places. So
The reason I ask is pre-COVID, I was very involved in a labyrinth program at our women's prison here in Oregon.
Oh yeah,
and hopefully we'll be back to it eventually.
That's great.
I think some of this would be very helpful for them, but
Yeah,
we don't
well,
have a lot. We don't have a lot of options of what we can bring in.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still a bit on the hunt for the last over a year to find something that's like that could be on like a CD disc that I could send in that they could, you know, show in their chapel.
Oh,
Or
okay.
they'd invite people down to see.
Yeah, well, this will be recorded. I mean, hopefully they'll get the recording up on YouTube, and then you could share that. Or there's other videos on YouTube. I have a Discover Labyrinths YouTube channel with other presentations that I've done, and those are available right now. So if you go to the YouTube Discover Labyrinths channel, you can watch other presentations by me.
But is there a way to put them onto a disc? Because I mean, it's not like I can take a computer in there. See, that's the trick with it all.
I think if you sign up for YouTube account, you can download them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep working.
And also the next TLS, the Labyrinth Society annual gathering, is going to be online, and they're going to have a panel discussion about labyrinths in prisons. So
I know I'm a part of that.
Oh, great. Super. There you go. Well, don't want to miss that one, Linda. I mean, Laura.
I better not. I might be in trouble.
All right. Well, I think we're wrapping up, right, Patricia?
Okay. Well, I really want to thank you, Lars. That was really a wonderful and interesting and inspiring discussion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I just want to let people know, Heidi put them on our things coming up. I'm going to do a finger labyrinth on Monday, and I'm going to do it on a timely discussion on heat.
Ooh.
And so that will be Monday. Information will be going out about it. And next month, Richard Feather Anderson will actually be speaking with us. Heidi has worked with him, and that will be on September 9th, and more information will be coming out about that. So, thank you.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.